3 American-based television studios have been given the green light to bring the Muppets to New Zealand for the very first time. All of the Muppets were originally owned by LA-based Jim Henson Company, but some have been sold to the Disney Company and Sesame Workshop. The family entertainment icons will be in Wellington to pay tribute to one of the world's most inspired and innovative puppetry artists, Jim Henson. The Jim Henson Retrospectacle brings his creative worlds together for the very first time in Wellington. The company behind this incredible festival is Square Eyes Film Foundation. Its director, Nic Marshall, is with us. Before we discuss the Jim Henson Retrospectacle, do you remember your first experience watching a Jim Henson show?
I have a very strong memory, which I have a feeling is an amalgam of a few memories. I just remember that very distinct feeling of a shared, a collective experience of finding the same stuff as my parents and my siblings funny all at once, which I think is such a rare thing when you're a kid. You know, you have your own kind of imaginative life with your siblings, which is funny, and you might, you know, you share jokes with your family, but to all be collectively amused by something, and that lovely feeling of that shared experience, that real cross-generational thing, I think that's my memory.
You're so right about that. The co-viewing experience that only Jim Henson shows could actually do, where both child and parent could sit there and laugh.
Yeah, and in a way that wasn't forced. You know, there weren't gags in there to capture parents' attention because it was primarily for kids and it was just to kind of get them through. It was that kind of gentle, anarchic kind of... that wonderful feeling that included everyone without being patronising. I just remember that feeling really well. And you know, I loved TV as a kid, and I did watch a lot of TV, but that was still a really special moment in our household, was that thing, watching that together.
And now you're bringing these famous characters to New Zealand, and I want to speak about that shortly because that would have been a hard task, I know. But let's discuss your foundation, Square Eyes Film Foundation. How did that come about?
Well, Square Eyes Film Foundation is an organisation I founded around 10 years ago, originally in partnership with the wonderful New Zealand International Film Festival. And I had been working in kids' TV for a bit and just realising that there was this wonderful array of terrific alternate material in the world that because we're here at the bottom of the world, don't always get the opportunity to see. And so the mandate really with Square Eyes was to bring imaginative art house in some ways for kids to audiences here in New Zealand. And so in partnership with the film festival, we started bringing material that I was sort of finding in different parts of the world and sharing that on the big screen.
And here we are several years later. How did the Jim Henson Retrospectacle come together? Because I said in my introduction, the Muppets are now owned by 3 different American companies. That would have been a very hard task, no doubt.
My experience has been pretty beautiful, and I feel incredibly fortunate to have come to the project through the Jim Henson legacy. So the very first email I sent from my newly formed Square Eyes Film Foundation email account was to the Jim Henson legacy, who had at that time very recently put together a program of compiled material from the archives called Muppets Music and Magic, and it had been screened at BAM, which is in Brooklyn. And I thought, now this is exactly the kind of work I would love to share as part of our kind of Square Eyes Film Foundation ethos here in New Zealand. Let's get this on the big screen and see if they'll be open to it. And I look at that email now, this earnest email about, what Jim Henson had meant to us here and how it reflected all of the values I was hoping to share in this newly formed foundation. And it reached the wonderful Arthur Novell, who was part of that Jim Henson legacy. Now, the legacy had formed after Jim's untimely passing, and it was a collection of family and friends who had banded together to keep his material available in the world. And we just struck up a connection, me here in New Zealand, them there in New York. and just started discussing what a program of films might feel like here in New Zealand. And from there it grew, and they were just the most welcoming and generous individuals. And, you know, it is a complicated thing to bring all of the pieces together, but I just feel like very thankful that the project has been seen as a deep celebration of Jim and all of his values, and that all those partners have come on board to help us share that here.
And these companies involved, you're right, they all do on the personal level have a deep affection for the man Jim Henson. When you
absolutely.
When you think about Sesame Workshop, when you think about even the Walt Disney Company, which of course now owns the Muppet rights to the likes of Miss Piggy and Kermit, and of course the Jim Henson Company itself. And I just want to briefly touch on some of the characters that will be making an appearance. For example, you've got some of the Fraggles from Fraggle Rock, and I was thinking about this the other day, that show from the 80s, but for some reason it doesn't seem to date. The message remains the same today, if not more powerful than it was in the 80s. Why do you think that is?
I've been reflecting on this a lot, and I was having a discussion with Dave Goals, who has been a Muppet performer for almost 44 years now, and he's well known for originating characters like Gonzo. He was also Uncle Travelling Matt in the Fraggles, and we were talking about these values and why they seem to resonate so deeply with people. And it just came down to one thing, which was sort of truth, like using this incredible art form, you know, and at various times very new kind of technology to share these, you know, Jim's positive, inclusive worldview that I think when you look at a particular generation of people who grew up on this, really impacted how we think about the world, you know, how we feel about diversity, and being able to you know, make grand statements but never take yourself too seriously. You know, there's that great Frank Oz quote, I think, whenever there was a character there who had something important to say, there was always another character right there ready to blow them up. You know, they just had that great playfulness, and it allowed all of those great values to be shared.
Well, speaking of Frank Oz, of course, the original Muppeteer of Miss Piggy, and you have some incredible artists who will be coming to New Zealand to speak about the likes of Miss Piggy, including a very famous puppet designer who, in fact, created the Miss Piggy puppet.
So Bonnie Erickson is just a completely remarkable woman. She is part of that Jim Henson legacy organisation. She's been instrumental in, you know, there's been a lot going on with this organisation for over 20 years as they've helped find permanent homes for the family's collection at MoMI, the Museum of Moving Image in Queens in New York, and the Atlanta Puppetry Arts Museum, and restoration of puppets and things being put in places where they'll be kept for future generations to kind of look at the creative process. But Bonnie's got an incredible story, which I'm just so thrilled New Zealanders are going to get to hear firsthand. She was a theatre designer, and Jim saw one of her productions and engaged her for costume designing, and she went on to be the designer behind characters, as you say, like Miss Piggy and Waldorf and Statler, and worked alongside Jim and the company for years in various capacities.
It is the Jim Henson Retrospectacle that is coming to Wellington. What are you looking forward to the most?
The idea that people will have access to our guests firsthand to hear their stories, to see. I think lots of people adore Jim Henson's work, but perhaps don't have a full understanding of the incredible stuff he did, his commercial work, which led him into his work for kids, his experimental films. He was just an incredible artist with a wide body of work, which I'm really excited to share on the big screen, and to also, you know, the new generation of Muppet, those who love Jim Henson's work in the Muppets, and to connect that with Brett McKenzie's work. There's this, it's the bringing the two communities together, really. I think it's going to be a pretty special feeling, I hope.
The Jim Henson Retrospectacle, you can head to the website, thejimhensonretrospectacle.co.nz. Square Eyes Film Foundation Director Nic Marshall is bringing the Muppets to New Zealand, and we thank you so much for your time this morning.
Thank you so much, Chris. It's been great to speak with you.